Lesson 11. Hyperopt Basics. Let me start with a moment that probably sounds familiar. You've got a strategy. Maybe it is based on RSI, the Relative Strength Index. The rule says, when RI drops below 30, buy. When it climbs back above 70, sell. You backtest it over 6 months, and the results are okay. Not amazing, but okay. A small profit, a win rate around 55%. You are a little disappointed, and then the question creeps in. Why 30? Why not 25 or 35? Where did that number even come from? Probably some textbook, or a YouTube video. Or you just picked it because it felt reasonable. And the moving average period, why is it 20? Why not 15 or 50? You start to realize your strategy is full of numbers you chose somewhat arbitrarily, and any one of them could be wrong. The obvious move is to test alternatives. So you change RSI from 30 to 25, rerun the backtest, and the profit goes up a little. Then you try 35, and it goes down. Then you wonder about the moving average, so you try 15, then 50. Each test takes a few minutes. After a week of this, you've got a spreadsheet full of combinations, and you are starting to lose track of which ones were actually better, and you suspect, correctly, that you've barely scratched the surface, because the full set of combinations of just 4 parameters can easily run into the tens of thousands. That is the problem Hyperopt is built to solve. What Hyperopt actually is, Hyperopt is short for hyperparameter optimization. The name comes from machine learning, where a hyperparameter is a number you set before training begins, as opposed to one the model learns on its own. In Freqtrade, the word is used a little more loosely. Basically, any tunable number in your strategy, the RSI threshold, the moving average period, the stop-loss percentage, the take-profit levels, is fair game. What Hyperopt does is automate the search. Instead of you trying combinations one at a time by hand, you tell Freqtrade the ranges you want to explore. RSI between 15 and 40, say. Moving average between 10 and 50. Stop-loss between 3% and 10%. And then you turn it loose. Hyperopt runs hundreds or thousands of backtests, each with a different combination of values drawn from those ranges. And at the end it hands you the combination that scored best, according to whatever metric you chose. So in a sentence, Hyperopt is a tool that searches the space of possible parameter values for your strategy, and finds the ones that performed best on historical data. I want to slow down on the phrase, space of possible parameter values, because it sounds abstract, but it is actually a useful mental picture. Parameter space, and how Hyperopt searches it. Imagine a strategy with 2 parameters, RA threshold, and moving average period. You can think of every possible combination as a point on a piece of paper. RE goes along the bottom, moving average goes up the side. Each combination, RIC 25, with moving average 20, is a dot somewhere on that sheet. Now imagine a third parameter, the stop-loss, and the combinations become points floating in a room. Add a fourth, and it is a space you can't easily picture. But the math doesn't care. Each combination of parameter values is a point in this high-dimensional space, and attached to each point is a number. How well that combination performed in a backtest. Hyperopt's job is to find the point with the best score. The dumb way to do it is to lay out a grid and test every single point. That works, but it explodes fast. 5 parameters, each with 10 possible values, gives you 100,000 combinations. Even at one backtest, per second, that is more than a day of computing. So Hyperopt is smarter. There are a few search algorithms it can use. The simplest is random search. It just picks combinations at random from your ranges and runs them. Surprisingly, random search is often not bad, because in high-dimensional spaces most of the variation in performance comes from just a few parameters, and random sampling finds those reasonably quickly. The more interesting one is called TPE, short for Tree-Structured Parson Estimator. Don't worry about the name. The idea is that instead of sampling blindly, TPE looks at which combinations have done well so far and which have done poorly, and it builds a rough model of where the good parts of parameter space probably are. Then it biases its next picks toward those regions. It is like a prospector who has found a few flakes of gold in one river and decides to pan that river more often, while still occasionally trying a new river just in case. The practical upshot is that TPA tends to find better parameters in fewer tries than pure random search, especially when each backtest is expensive. Freqtrade also supports other search strategies, But for most users, the choice is between random and TPE. And TPE is the default for good reason. One more piece of the puzzle before we get to actually running it. You have to tell Hyperopt what best means. Loss functions, or what you are actually optimizing this, is the part people skip and then regret. Hyperopt needs a way to score each backtest, so it knows which combinations to keep and which to throw away. That scoring rule is called a loss function. And the choice matters a lot, because Hyperopt will ruthlessly optimize for whatever you tell it to. The simplest loss is just total profit. Run a backtest. See how much money it made. Bigger is better. The problem is that pure profit rewards reckless strategies. A strategy that doubles your money by holding a single leveraged position through a lucky rally will score beautifully, even though it took on enormous risk to get there. If you optimize for pure profit, you will end up with strategies that took big risks and got lucky in your backtest. So the better loss functions are risk-adjusted. Freqtrade has several built-in. Sharpe ratio is one of the most popular. The Sharpe ratio measures return relative to volatility. So a strategy that makes 20% with smooth, steady gains scores better than one that makes 20% with wild swings up and down. There is also something called profit factor, which is the total profit from winning trades divided by the total loss from losing trades. Anything above 1 means profitable, above 2 is considered good, above 3 is excellent. Profit factor rewards consistency rather than raw size. There are others, some penalize drawdown, some target a specific number of trades, some focus on win rate. The point is to pick one that matches what you actually care about. If you can't sleep at night when your account is in a deep drawdown, optimize for something that punishes drawdown. If you want steady small wins, pick a loss function that rewards high win rate. Don't just leave the default and hope. Running it now, let me walk you through what an actual Hyperopt run looks like, without reading commands at you. You start by telling Freqtrade which strategy you want to optimize. Then you tell it the time range of historical data to use, and you should give it at least 6 months, ideally more. A month or 2 is not enough, because any combination can get lucky on a short window. You pick a loss function, the thing you are optimizing for. You pick the spaces, which is Freqtrade's word for the categories of parameters you want to search. The usual spaces are buy, sell, ROI, stop loss, and optionally trailing. Buy and sell cover your entry and exit signal thresholds, the RSI levels, and so on. ROI, return on investment, is the table that tells the bot when to take profit at different time horizons. Stop loss is your maximum loss per trade. Trailing is the more sophisticated version of a stop loss that follows the price upward. Then you pick how many epochs to run. An epoch is one search iteration. In each epoch, Hyperopt picks a set of parameter values, runs a backtest, scores it, and updates its model. A few hundred epochs is a reasonable starting point for a first pass. 1,000 is more thorough. Each epoch is one backtest, so the time it takes is roughly your single backtest time multiplied by the number of epochs. You can also tell it a minimum number of trades. This is important. If you let Hyperopt accept combinations that only made 2 or 3 trades in the entire backtest period, you will get nonsense. A strategy that bought once and got lucky has a 100% win rate, and that is meaningless. Always require a meaningful number of trades, at least 50, ideally 100 or more, before you trust any result. When it finishes, Hyperopt prints out the best combination it found, the parameters and the score they achieved. And here is where I need to slow way down, because this is the part that bites people. The honest danger, overfitting everything I've described, sounds great. You tell Hyperopt what to optimize. It runs thousands of backtests. It finds the best parameters. What could go wrong? The answer is overfitting, and it is the central trap of this entire subject. I want you to understand it deeply, because it will eat your money if you don't. Here is the intuition. When you run a backtest, you are not really testing whether your strategy is good. You are testing whether your strategy, with these specific parameters, happen to make money on this specific stretch of historical data. Those are very different statements. The second is a description of the past. Now, when you let Hyperopt try thousands of combinations and pick the best, you are doing something sneaky. You are effectively searching for the combination that happens to fit this specific past data best. And the more combinations you try, the more likely you are to find one that fits the past extremely well, even if the underlying logic is weak or random. Imagine an absurd version to make it clear. Suppose your strategy had a parameter that was literally just a lucky date. Buy if the day of the month is 17 and the hour is 14. If you let Hyperopt search across enough date and hour combinations on a fixed historical window, it will absolutely find combinations that made huge returns, because somewhere in that window there was a big move at 14 o'clock on the 17th. And the strategy that bought exactly then looks brilliant in hindsight. Run that strategy live, and it will do nothing useful, because the next 14 o'clock on the 17th is not going to replicate the magic. Real overfitting is rarely that obvious, but the mechanism is identical. When you push Hyperopt hard enough on a fixed window of data, you stop finding strategies that are genuinely good and start finding parameters that memorize the noise in that specific window. The backtest numbers get more beautiful with every epoch. The live results get worse. This is the single most important thing I will tell you in this lesson. A backtest result that comes out of heavy optimization is not evidence of future performance. It is, at best, a description of how your parameters happen to interact with this exact slice of history. The harder you optimize, the more suspicious you should be of the result. How to defend yourself? So how do you use this tool without fooling yourself? There are a few habits that help, and none of them are optional. First, use enough data. 6 months minimum, a year or more if you can. The shorter your data window, the easier it is for Hyperopt to find parameters that just memorized that window. More data means the parameters have to work across more kinds of market conditions to score well, which makes genuinely good parameters more likely to surface. Second, split your data. Don't optimize on the same data you use to validate. Pick a window, say the first 8 months of the year, and run Hyperopt only on that. Then take the parameters it found and backtest them on a different window, the last 4 months, that Hyperopt never saw. If the parameters hold up on data they weren't optimized for, you have at least some evidence they're not just memorizing. If they fall apart on the unseen window, you overfit, and you need to back off. Third, keep your parameter ranges reasonable. Don't let Hyperopt explore absurd values. If you tell it RSI can be anything from 1 to 99, it will find combinations that exploit weird corners of the data. Keep ranges within values that make logical sense for the indicator. RA between 15 and 40 for oversold conditions. Fine. RSI between 1 and 99. Asking for trouble. Fourth, don't over-optimize. A few hundred epochs on a handful of parameters is one thing. 10,000 epochs across every parameter and every space is a recipe for memorizing noise. You are looking for parameters that are robust, not parameters that are perfect. Forward test. After you found parameters that survive validation, run them in paper trading on live data for a few weeks. Paper trading uses real-time market data but no real money. If the strategy keeps behaving reasonably in live conditions, you've done about as much as you can to earn some confidence. If it immediately falls apart, the optimization was overfit, even if it looked clean on the validation window. 6. And this is more of an attitude than a technique, trust domain knowledge over optimization. If Hyperopt finds a combination that scores well, but the parameters make no logical sense, an RSI threshold of 7 or a stop loss of 23%, be suspicious. A strategy whose parameters have a sensible story behind them tends to generalize better than one whose parameters are just whatever Hyperopt landed on. Use optimization to refine good ideas, not to invent strategies from scratch. A realistic workflow. Let me tie it together with how this looks in practice. When you use it well, you start with a strategy whose logic you actually believe in. Maybe it is a mean reversion approach on RSI, with a sensible moving average filter. You've chosen initial parameter values based on what makes sense for the indicator. You backtest it manually, and confirm it is at least not losing money. Then you open up Hyperopt on a reasonable window of data, with reasonable ranges around your initial values, and you run a few hundred epochs with a risk-adjusted loss function, like Sharpe ratio or profit factor. You require at least 50 or 100 trades. Hyperopt gives you back a set of improved parameters. You sanity check them. Do they still make logical sense? Are they dramatically different from what you started with? If a single parameter jumped from 30 to 7, that is a red flag. It means Hyperopt found a quirk in the data, not a real signal. Then you backtest those parameters on a separate window of data Hyperopt never saw. If they hold up, you forward test them in paper trading for a few weeks. If they survive that, you might consider deploying them with small real capital. That whole chain, optimize, sanity check, validate on unseen data, forward test in paper, deploy small, is the discipline. Skip any step and you are back in overfitting territory. What Hyperopt is not. One last thing before we wrap up. Hyperopt is not a magic strategy generator. It cannot invent a profitable strategy from a bad idea. If your underlying logic is broken, no amount of parameter tuning will save it. Hyperopt refines strategies that have something real going for them. It does not resurrect strategies that don't. It is also not a substitute for thinking. The loss function you pick, the ranges you set, the spaces you choose, are all decisions that require judgment. Hyperopt executes your decisions ruthlessly well. It does not make them for you. And it is definitely not a guarantee of future returns. Even a carefully validated, sensibly optimized strategy can lose money in live trading, because markets change, because black swans happen, because the future is not the past. Hyperopt improves your odds of finding robust parameters. It does not eliminate risk. Used carefully. Hyperopt is one of the most powerful tools in Freqtrade. Used carelessly, it is the fastest way to fool yourself into thinking you have a great strategy when you really have a memorized backtest. The difference between those two outcomes is almost entirely about how honestly you handle overfitting. That is the heart of this lesson. The mechanics of running Hyperopt are not complicated. The commands are short. The options are documented. The workflow is straightforward. What is hard, and what matters, is the discipline of using it without lying to yourself about what the results mean. Get that part right, and you've understood the lesson. Get it wrong, and no amount of optimization will save you.